In 1986, a 22-year-old from Compton had $250,000 in cash and a decision to make. He could keep selling drugs, or he could gamble everything on an industry that wanted nothing to do with him. He couldn't rap. He didn't want to rap.
No, I can't, because I'm not a rapper. There's your rapper.
His own producer had to lock him in a studio for 2 days just to get one song out of him. That song became the blueprint for gangster rap. This is the story of Eric Wright, businessman, jokester, 5'5" kingpin of West Coast rap. He got robbed at gunpoint by Suge Knight.
Suge tried to destroy my record company.
And somehow still walked away with the win. He signed one of the greatest groups in hip-hop history, off a collect call, and his final days shocked the entire music world. This is the story of Eazy-E. Eric Lynn Wright was born September 7, 1964, in Compton, California, and the first surprise comes early. His parents were the kind of people rap songs don't usually get written about. His father Richard worked for the post office. His mother Kathy worked in school administration. 2 parents, steady paychecks, a roof that never went anywhere. But the Compton outside their front door? That was changing fast. Through the late 60s and 70s, the neighborhoods around the Wright family were carved up into gang territories. The Crips formed, then the Bloods formed in response, and street sets multiplied block by block. By the time Eric was a teenager, the city barely resembled the one his parents had moved into. Staying neutral wasn't really an option. Everybody was from somewhere, whether they claimed it or not. Eric went to Compton High, but school and Eric Wright were never going to work out. He dropped out in 10th grade, then picked up his GED later, which is worth pausing on. He didn't finish school, but he went back and closed the loop anyway. Even as a teenager, he was keeping his options open. In the meantime, the street was paying, and Eric was very good at it. Dealing wasn't a phase for him, and it wasn't small-time corner work. He treated it like a business, because to him, it was one. He kept his operation organized and his profile low, and by his own account, he'd stacked around $250,000 by his early 20s, before he ever touched a microphone. Was that number exact, or inflated for effect? We'll never know. Rappers round up. But the point stands either way. When Eric Wright walked into the music business, he was not looking for a record deal because he was broke. So, what makes a man with $250,000 in street money walk away from the thing that earned it? His cousin was shot and killed. And Eric started doing math that had nothing to do with money. Every year in the game raised the odds that he'd end up in a cell or a casket. He'd already been arrested more than once. He'd already watched people around him disappear, one way or the other. The money was real. But so was the expiration date. He wanted an exit that let him keep his lifestyle and his life. Music looked like the way out. Not as an artist, as an owner. Eric's plan was never to be the guy on stage. It was to be the guy on stage answers to.
At first, he wasn't a rapper at all. Didn't want to be.
He'd watched enough of the industry to understand where the real money sat, and it wasn't in the booth. So he took his drug profits and did something almost nobody from his world had done before. He founded his own label. To get anywhere in an industry that was overwhelmingly white and openly hostile to street music, he partnered with a veteran manager named Jerry Heller, an old-school music business guy who'd worked with major rock and pop acts in the 70s. On paper, the two of them made no sense together. In practice, Heller opened doors that Eric couldn't, and Eric brought Heller something the manager hadn't had in years: a future. Together, they built Ruthless Records. The talent came from Eric's own backyard. There was a DJ spinning in a flashy electro group called the World-Class Wreckin' Crew. a guy with an incredible ear, who was wasting his gifts on sequined jumpsuits. His name was Andre Young. You know him, as Dr. Dre. Dre was broke, constantly in and out of jail on unpaid tickets, and Eazy reportedly bailed him out more than once. In exchange, Dre produced for the new label. It might be the best bail money anyone has ever spent. And then, there was the kid, a teenage lyricist from South Central with glasses and a notebook, who wrote with more venom and more precision than anyone in Los Angeles. O'Shea Jackson, Ice Cube. Cube wrote a track called Boys in the Hood. It was originally meant for a New York group called HBO that Ruthless had signed. The group heard this hyper-detailed, hyper-violent West Coast street narrative and flat-out refused to record it. Too regional, too raw for their taste. They walked. So now Ruthless had a beat, a finished set of lyrics, studio time paid for, and no artist. Cube couldn't record it himself because he was committed to another group at the time. Dre was a producer, not a frontman, which left exactly one person standing in the room. Eazy said no, over and over, and loudly. He was an executive with drug money, not a performer. He'd never rapped in his life, but Dre kept pushing, insisting that Eazy's voice, that high, nasal, almost cartoonish delivery, would cut through a record like nothing else on the radio. Dre heard something nobody else heard, including Eazy himself. What happened next has become studio legend. Getting a single verse out of Eazy took days. He couldn't stay on beat. He couldn't deliver a line the way it was written. Dre eventually cleared the entire room and worked with him one-on-one, punching in a bar at a time. People who left the studio came back the next day and found them still crawling through the second verse. By every account from everyone who was there, it was painful. Then the record dropped, and none of that mattered. Boys in the Hood hit Compton like a bomb, then spread across Los Angeles and out across the country, moving through swap meets and car stereos with almost no radio support. The voice Dre fought for became one of the most recognizable sounds in rap. The awkwardness, the strain, the almost offbeat delivery. On record, it came across as menace, as a real street dude who didn't care about your rules, because that's exactly what it was. The dealer who didn't want to rap was suddenly a star, and the label he built to stay behind the scenes suddenly had a face. In 1988, Eazy released his solo debut, Eazy Does It. And the machine behind it was out in the open. Dre and DJ Yella built the beats. Ice Cube and MC Ren wrote most of the bars, and Eazy delivered them with a menace and a smirk nobody else could fake. The album went platinum. A former drug dealer with no musical training had one of the biggest rap records in the country. What made him different from almost every rapper before or since is that he told you, on record, he flat out rapped that Ice Cube wrote his rhymes in a genre built on claims of authenticity, where getting exposed for using a ghostwriter can end a career. Eazy just said it, put it in a verse. Years later, the people around him would talk about that line with something like AW, because nobody could believe he actually let it ride. But that was the trick. Eazy's honesty about being a performer was his authenticity. He wasn't pretending to be a poet. He was a hustler fronting a movement, the executive producer who happened to also be the star. And he said so with his whole chest. You couldn't expose Eazy-E. He'd already exposed himself, laughed about it, and cashed the check. That same year, the group recorded Straight Outta Compton in about 6 weeks. Albums that reshape entire cultures usually take years of label meetings and second guessing. This one took a month and a half. in a modest studio, because nobody involved thought they were making history. They thought they were making noise. The most explosive track on it almost didn't make the cut. Ice Cube brought in a protest song aimed directly at law enforcement. Born out of years of harassment, roadside searches, and the everyday reality of being young and black in Los Angeles under Chief Daryl Gates, Dre initially thought it went too far and would bring heat the group didn't need. Then Dre and Eazy got arrested for firing paintball guns at people from a van, spent time dealing with actual police, and Dre's objections evaporated. The song went on the album. What followed was one of the strangest marketing campaigns in music history, and nobody planned any of it. The FBI sent Ruthless a warning letter about the track. Police departments refused to provide security at their shows. In Detroit, officers rushed the stage when the group tried to perform it. Politicians denounced them. Parent groups organized against them, and every ban sold another 100,000 records. Kids in suburbs who had never seen Compton were begging their parents to drive them to record stores. The group was being censored into superstardom. They called themselves the world's most dangerous group, and half of America believed them. Critics accused N.W.A. of glorifying violence and degrading women. And if you read the lyrics off the page, the critics had plenty of material to work with. Eazy would sit through interview after interview where journalists tried to pin him down on it, and he'd deflect with a shrug and a joke, giving them nothing. What the outraged press never figured out was that the people who actually knew Eric Wright kept describing a completely different person than the one on the records. A prankster who clowned around constantly, pulled gags on everyone around him, and couldn't get through an interview without cracking somebody up. His own son would later say, people constantly tell him he acts just like his father because of how much Eric loved making people laugh. There's footage of him doing word association games on TV, deadpanning absurd answers, giggling behind those dark lock sunglasses he almost never took off. The scariest man in rap was off camera, kind of a goofball. The Gangsta was the product, Eric Wright was the salesman, and business was incredible. By 1990, Ruthless wasn't just N.W.A. Eazy had built a genuine label with a real roster. The D.O.C., one of the most technically gifted rappers of the era, Michelle, a singer with a massive voice, who gave the label R and B hits, J.J. Fad, whose success had helped fund the whole operation early on. Eazy-E, the drug dealer from Compton, was running a diversified music company, but the same money that built Ruthless started breaking it. Ice Cube was the first domino. By this point, Cube was writing enormous portions of the group's material, both for the albums and for Eazy's solo work. His pen was arguably the engine of the entire operation, and when contract time came, Jerry Heller put $75,000 on the table. For a group that had sold millions of records, Cube looked at that number and saw an insult. So he did the thing you're supposed to do. He asked to take his contract to a lawyer before signing. A standard, boring, responsible move. The answer he got back? Anything but standard. You can sign it here, but you can't take it with you. Cube walked. No lawsuit, no scene. He just left, moved to New York, and recorded a solo album with Public Enemy's production team that immediately went gold. The message was unmistakable. The pen had left the building, and the pen was doing just fine. Eazy took it personally. In his mind, Cube wasn't savvy enough to make that move on his own. Someone had to be whispering in his ear, coaching him out the door. The group answered the departure with disses on their next two projects, the 100 Miles and Runnin' EP and the Eiffel 4 Zaggin album, mocking their former writer on wax, while that album, incredibly, hit #1 on the Billboard chart. Gangsta rap, banned from radio, protested in the streets, was now officially the most popular music in America. But dissing Ice Cube turned out to be a historic mistake. Because in 1991, Cube responded with No Vaseline, 4 minutes that functioned less like a diss track and more like a demolition. He went at the whole group, at Jerry Heller, at Eazy's business, his manhood, his money. He turned their own street credibility against them, framing them as employees getting robbed by their own label, and he left nothing standing. To this day, No Vaseline is ranked among the most one-sided victories in the history of battle rap. Some people say the most one-sided, period. There was talk inside the Ruthless camp of a response. A beat was even made. The words never came. A label full of the best writers on the West Coast, and nobody could figure out what to say back. And here's the wild part. N.W.A. basically admitted defeat. Privately, the reaction inside the group wasn't rage or revenge plots. It was something closer to a stunned, almost respectful. He got us. The dissing stopped. There was nothing left to say, and everyone knew it. Some time later, Eazy and Cube crossed paths in a parking garage. Cube had one friend with him. Eazy famously rolled alone. He had the kind of respect in the city where he didn't need bodyguards, unless he felt like having them. People nearby braced for violence, figuring they were about to watch the most famous beef in rap turn physical. Instead, the two men shook hands, quick, quiet, done. Whatever the record said, they settled it in about 5 seconds and went their separate ways. Keep that handshake in mind. It comes back at the end of this story. Losing Cube hurt Ruthless. What happened with Dre nearly killed it. The problem was the same one. The money didn't match the work. Dr. Dre was producing essentially everything the label released. Every N.W.A. record, Eazy's records, the D.O.C. Michelala, the entire Ruthless sound came out of one man's ears. And when people around Dre finally got eyes on his paperwork, the numbers were ugly. By some accounts, he was earning roughly 2 cents per record. 2 cents from the architect of the most successful sound on the West Coast. The person who helped him see it was the D.O.C., who introduced Dre to a former bodyguard and college football player with enormous ambitions and a talent for intimidation, Marion Knight. Everyone called him Soog. Dre, furious about the money, gave Eazy a choice: fire Jerry Heller or lose me. And Eazy, whether out of loyalty or stubbornness or a belief that Jerry was irreplaceable, kept Jerry. That decision split the West Coast in half. Dre and Soog began building Death Row Records, the label that would define the next era of hip-hop. But there was one enormous problem. Dre was still legally chained to Ruthless. Every contract, every obligation still ran through Eazy's company. Dre shopped the Chronic all over Los Angeles and even out to New York, and label after label passed. Not because the music wasn't brilliant, but because nobody wanted to buy a lawsuit. Until those chains came off, Death Row was a label that couldn't legally release its own star. So, a meeting was arranged. Eazy was told Dre wanted to sit down and talk things out. Eazy showed up to a hotel, expecting his old friend. Dre never came. What walked in instead was Soog Knight. And according to people close to the situation, the room was not empty. Men emerged from hiding spots, from the closet, from under the bed, from the bathroom, weapons drawn. Release papers slid across the table, papers freeing Dre and the D.O.C. from Ruthless Records. And to remove any ambiguity about what was being asked, Soog reportedly mentioned a piece of paper of his own, one with the address, where Eazy's mother lived. Eazy signed. He left that room, according to Jerry Heller, ready to have Soog Knight killed. not as a figure of speech. Heller talked him out of it, convinced him the fallout would destroy everything they'd built. Years later, an older Heller would say, half joking and half absolutely not joking, that stopping him was a mistake, that letting it happen might have done the world a favor. That's the manager, talking about his own decision. But then the story flips, and you finally see exactly who Eric Wright was. The signature on those release papers? There's a long-standing claim from people in Eazy's circle that it wasn't legitimate, that he signed in a way that wouldn't hold. And whatever the truth of that night, the legal outcome was undeniable and astonishing. Ruthless Records walked away with a piece of everything Dr. Dre produced for years afterward. A percentage of every copy of The Chronic. A percentage of Snoop Doggy Dogg's Doggy Style. One of the biggest debuts in music history. Death Row's empire had a silent partner, and that partner was the man they'd held at gunpoint. So when Dre and Snoop mocked him on Dre Day, one of the biggest singles of 1993, with a whole music video dedicated to humiliating a parody version of him, Eazy's response was almost cheerful. He rebranded the insult. Dre Day, he said, was just Eazy's payday. Diss me all you want, gentlemen. Every copy you sell, I get paid. They pulled guns on him, and he still won the deal. But Eazy didn't just cash checks and smile. He answered on wax, and he answered hard. Through his network, he connected with two brothers from Compton, Gangsta and BG Knock Out, young rappers with genuine street credibility and hunger. Eazy sat with Gangsta and told him stories, real stories, about Dre, about the Wreckin' Crew days, the outfits, the makeup, the history the new Death Row image conveniently erased. Gangsta built a concept around it and wrote for himself and Eazy. His brother reportedly freestyled his verse right there on the spot, and it made the record. The result was Real Motherfucking G's, Eazy's counterstrike at Death Row, released on his EP It's On Dr. Dre 187 Killer, which went on to sell over 2 million copies. The diss war Dre started ended up funding Eazy's biggest solo success. Even the music video came with its own drama. Eazy hired a well-known comedian to play a bumbling parody character, mocking the Death Row portrayal of him. After the first day of shooting, the actor abruptly quit. He'd later describe being called into Suge Knight's office, a firearm coming out, and a very clear instruction to walk away from the project. The money he'd already been paid didn't matter. He was done. Eazy recast the part with another comedian and finished the video anyway. Suge could scare an actor off a set, but scaring Eric Wright off his own project, that was a different job entirely. The beef with Death Row never really ended. Something else ended it. By late 1994, something unexpected was happening. Eazy and Cube were cool again, and had been since that parking garage handshake. The two of them talked for hours at one point, and Eazy floated the unthinkable, getting N.W.A. back together. Cube's answer was simple. Square things with Dre and I'm in, and against all odds. The ice with Dre was thawing too. The most dangerous group in the world, reunited, in the era of the Chronic and Doggy Style, with all the beef behind them. It would have been the biggest event hip-hop had ever seen. Meanwhile, Eazy, the executive, was cooking again. He'd taken a collect call from a group of unknown kids in Cleveland who harmonized their raps at lightning speed, flown them out, and signed them. Bone Thugs and Harmony. Their music was about to explode into one of the best-selling acts of the decade. Eazy's ear, the thing people always underrated about him, was still sharper than almost anyone's in the business. Everything was lining up. Then came February, 1995. Eazy started struggling to breathe. His chest was tight. He had a cough that wouldn't quit, and his breathing got worse instead of better. He wrote it off as asthma. He'd dealt with breathing issues before. and Eric Wright was not the type to sit in waiting rooms while there was work to do. In mid-February, he finally went in, spending a few days at a hospital in Norwalk before being released when his condition stabilized. And in the most easy move imaginable, he went from the hospital to the pharmacy and directly to the recording studio. Same day. There was an album to finish. Bone Thugs needed verses. He had work due, and a hospital stay was an interruption, not a warning. Days later, back in that same studio, it all collapsed. He'd been in the building maybe an hour and a half, supposed to record a short part, just a little verse, and he kept stalling outside the booth. When someone went to check on him, he was wheezing hard, hitting his inhaler over and over, sweating, deteriorating in real time. This was not asthma, and everyone in the room suddenly knew it. Security was called, and Eazy was rushed to Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. This time, the doctors ran deeper tests, and the results explained everything. The diagnosis was AIDS. Not HIV caught early with time to fight. AIDS, fully advanced. His immune system was already gone, and his body could no longer defend itself. Nobody saw it coming, including Eazy himself. Everyone had assumed it was his lungs, an infection, complications from asthma. When he told his mother, he reached for the only reference point the world really had at the time. He told her he had what Magic Johnson had, and then he said the word. The difference was brutal. Magic had caught his diagnosis early, with a functioning immune system and time. Eric had neither. How did it happen? Eazy had never hidden his lifestyle. He'd fathered several children with several women, and in interviews over the years, he'd joked away questions about protection, with the swagger of a man who thought he was untouchable. In 1995, that swagger came due, in the cruelest way possible. On March 16, 1995, Eazy did something that took more courage than anything he ever said on a record. Through his attorney, he went public. A statement was read to the press, admitting exactly what he had. No spin, no vague talk of an illness. And the heart of the message wasn't about him at all. He said he wanted to turn his situation into something good, wanted young people, his people, to learn from what was happening to him before it was too late. The man who built a career on being untouchable used his final press statement to tell kids they weren't. He also made phone calls. Friends remember him saying, more than once, some version of 2 words: "Watch yourself." Some of them had no idea what he meant. They found out days later when the news broke, and understood he'd spent some of his last energy warning the people he cared about. The disease moved brutally fast. Severe pneumonia set in. He lost the ability to breathe on his own and was partially paralyzed. Doctors attempted a high-risk procedure to clear his lungs, knowing the odds were close to a coin flip, and placed him into an induced coma afterward. He never woke up. In his final weeks, he married his longtime girlfriend, Tamika, from his hospital bed, putting his estate and his children's futures in order, even as his body failed, handling business right up to the end. Eric Wright died on March 26, 1995, 10 days after telling the world. He was 30 years old. In his final public statement, he sent love to the people who had ridden with him from the beginning, and specifically, by name, to his brothers in N.W.A. The beefs, the lawsuits, the diss records, the guns in the hotel room, none of it made the final message. The group did. Thousands of people came out for his funeral in Compton. He was buried in a gold casket, dressed the only way anyone had ever known him. Flannel, jeans, and a Compton hat. The speed of it all still doesn't sit right with some people. from diagnosis to death, in barely a month. Family members and close friends have publicly questioned the official story for decades, and the theories about what really happened aren't going anywhere. We're not going to pretend to settle that here, because nobody can. What is settled is this. A 10th grade dropout from Compton took drug money, bet it on a sound every label in America rejected, and built the foundation that Dre, Cube, Snoop, Bone Thugs, and arguably all of modern West Coast rap stands on. 20 years after his death, a movie about his group became one of the biggest music biopics ever made. A year after that, N.W.A. was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, an institution that once wouldn't have let them in the building. He never claimed to be the best rapper. He never needed to. He claimed to be the smartest guy in the room. And looking back at the contracts, at the 2 cents and the 20%, he was usually right. The reunion never happened. The response to No Vaseline never dropped. The Bone Thugs verses got finished, without him. But every artist who has ever owned their own masters, run their own label, or said exactly what they wanted on a record without asking permission, owes a little something to Eric Wright. Rest easy. Easy.